You have done everything the world said would keep you secure. The degrees hang framed on the wall, the mortgage is almost paid, and your name is spoken with respect at family gatherings. Yet in the hush before dawn, when the house is dark and the hum of appliances is the only music, a tremor moves through you, subtle as a draft slipping under the door. For reasons you cannot name, you lie awake with the unsettling sense that the floor beneath your life might crumble if you stop holding your breath. Friends call it stress. Doctors use words like insomnia. Deep inside, however, you suspect the roots reach farther back than any present circumstance. Carl Jung would meet that suspicion with a gentle nod. He taught that beneath our achievements lies a living symbol he called the Father Archetype, the inner figure entrusted with granting us direction, protection, and permission to exist. If the real father was absent, harsh, or distracted, the inner father twists into something fragile or condemning, leaving the adult child with polished outer walls but no true foundation. The boardroom executive who cannot sleep because every decision feels like a hidden verdict. The 50-something woman who hesitates at each crossroads, waiting for authority that never arrives. Both reveal the same unseen wound, a compass needle spinning for want of north. You may recognize moments of your own spinning. Perhaps you catch yourself rehearsing conversations long after they end, certain you misstepped. Perhaps celebration feels dangerous, as though joy might provoke punishment. You build, you provide, you strive, yet some part of you is still the child, scanning the horizon for a figure who never quite turns to meet your gaze. That child learned to survive by becoming remarkable, reliable, indispensable, anything but vulnerable. And so the body of success carries the breath of unease, each inhalation wondering whether it is allowed. If the need for safety begins within, no amount of external triumph can grant it. Yet this realization is not a sentence, it is an opening. For the Father Archetype, though wounded, is not dead. He waits in the corridors of dream and memory, asking not for retribution, but for recognition. The path to steadiness is less about rewriting the story of your life than about turning toward the silent figure inside it, offering the trust and guidance he once withheld. To do so is to rebuild the house from its buried beams upward, so that when the next restless night comes, you meet it from a place that does not shake. And that brings us to a difficult truth you may have sensed all along. You have been steering through decades without an inner compass. The journey ahead will not replace the father you lost. It will teach you to become the wise guardian you always needed. The first step begins where the tremor rises, in the quiet room of your own heart, waiting to be heard. There comes a season, often in the middle stretch of life, when the trophies on the mantle and the framed certificates on the wall begin to lose their glow, not because they are any less impressive, but because you realize you have no idea where they were meant to lead you. You wake before the alarm, sit on the edge of the bed, and feel an odd weight in the chest, as if the very air is thicker than it used to be. The calendar is full, your phone lights up with appointments, and the day is planned down to the minute. Yet, under all that activity, a quiet question drums like a second heartbeat. What am I actually moving toward? That question is not laziness in disguise, nor ingratitude for what you have achieved. It is the soul reminding you that navigation requires more than momentum. It requires orientation. And without orientation, effort becomes wandering. Jung compared this feeling to sailing with torn maps. You can have a magnificent vessel, the best crew, a deck polished by years of discipline, but if the charts are smudged or missing, each wave feels like a threat. The missing chart is the Father Archetype, the psychic landmark that whispers, "This is north, this is home. This is how you know you are safe even in the storm." When a father was physically present, yet emotionally absent, or when his presence hovered like a storm cloud instead of a lighthouse, the inner compass goes magnetically confused. Externally, you raise children, pay taxes, and offer wise counsel to friends. Internally, you hesitate before every major decision, hoping someone will step into the room and quietly nod approval. No one comes, but the hesitation remains. I worked with a client, a respected architect in his late 50s, whose buildings rose gleaming against the skyline, yet who dreaded every new project. He would present blueprints with shaking hands, terrified the board would discover he was a fraud. Logic told him he was competent. The market confirmed it by hiring him again and again. Still, driving home at night, he often missed his exit, caught in anxious reverie about whether he had overlooked some fatal flaw. When we traced the feeling back, the memory that surfaced was not about architecture at all. It was about a father who inspected his childhood science fair projects, only to point out the crooked lines, never the creativity. The adult architect kept drawing skyscrapers, but a 7-year-old still held the pencil. Each new commission became another desperate attempt to win an approving glance that would never arrive. Such stories live in many forms. The dependable eldest daughter who organizes every holiday, yet cries in secret after guests leave because she cannot escape the feeling that she did something wrong. The entrepreneur who sells one company and immediately starts another is restless, driven, and unsure of what quiet might reveal. They do not lack capability or opportunity. They are missing that invisible line connecting their actions to an inner sense of destiny. A mapless life is exhausting precisely because it looks successful from the outside. The contradiction between external clarity and internal fog drains the spirit. Jung insisted that the father never truly disappears, even when he leaves the household or departs this world. He takes refuge in the psyche, sometimes as a silent absence, sometimes as a stern inner judge, but always influencing the journey. When you sense that influence yet cannot name it, you may try to outrun the unease with new certifications, fresh relationships, or spiritual workshops. You keep busy so you do not have to feel disoriented, yet busyness without direction deepens the exile. It is like rearranging furniture on a ship wandering aimlessly at sea. The room looks different, but the horizon has not changed. If you listen closely, you might notice moments when the inner father stirs. Perhaps you hesitate to accept a promotion because a voice says you are not ready, or you hesitate to rest because idleness feels unsafe. That is the shadow father tugging the chain of an old, unseen contract. The more you push him away, the more he governs from beneath awareness. Only by turning toward him, acknowledging his presence, do you begin to rewrite the map. The shift is subtle at first. You catch yourself before an automatic apology and ask, "Who am I apologizing to?" You accept praise without immediate self-deprecation and find that the room does not collapse. These small acts are like finding north on a faulty compass. Each adjustment brings the dial closer to the truth. But what is more unsettling, more liberating, is this. The father never truly vanished. He lives still, etched in the corridors of memory, lingering in the way you clench your jaw during conflict, echoing in the silence you keep after a compliment. He remains until you meet him, not to fight, but to listen. For only then can he transform from tyrant to teacher, from absence to guiding presence. And so the real voyage begins, not with another external milestone, but with an interior turn of the helm. You close the laptop, sit in the late afternoon light, and instead of planning the next conquest, you ask the harder question, where is my true north? The answer will not shout. It will surface as a slow certainty, a warmth in the ribcage, a gentle but unmistakable pull toward authenticity. Follow that pull, and the maps you were missing begin to draw themselves from the inside out. The next stage of our journey explores that shadow father in more detail, for only by knowing his shape can we loosen his grip and chart a course of our own choosing. Picture a conference room washed in fluorescent light, the kind that magnifies every wrinkle on the table and every doubt in your mind. You sit across from a senior executive whose expression is unreadable, waiting for your presentation to begin. Your slides are crisp, your research flawless, yet your throat tightens and your palms grow damp. A subtle trembling begins in your leg, barely visible, but to you it feels like an earthquake. This is not stage fright. It is something deeper, older. In the unspoken space between you and that figure of authority, an invisible presence rises. The Father, not as guardian, but as a looming silhouette of judgment. In that instant, you sense a truth you have tried to outrun. The Father never left. He merely changed form. He settled into the shadows of your psyche, where he governs not with guiding hands, but with silent threats, directing you through fear of being exposed or found wanting. Carl Jung named this presence the shadow father, the dark internal twin of the protective parent we longed for. For some, it is the father who shouted. For others, the father who never came home. And for many, it is simply the father who, even when present, could not see the child's heart. Over time, his outer voice fades, but his inner echo grows sharper. He becomes the critic who scoffs when you dare to dream, the skeptic who questions every victory, the unseen puppeteer who makes you stumble just before the finish line. You think you sabotage yourself by accident, yet each time you decline a promotion or abandon a passion, his grim silhouette stands nearby, nodding in approval. A client once described it to me as a courtroom in his chest. He was a skilled engineer invited to lead a prestigious project. The night before accepting, he forgot to set his alarm, arrived late to the final interview, and lost the opportunity. When we traced the thread backward, he remembered a childhood evening when he proudly showed his father a science award, only to be met with a glance that said, "Do not get ahead of yourself." Decades later, the same verdict reverberated. Pride is risky, success invites punishment. The shadow father had ruled that courtroom for 40 years, rendering sentence after sentence from behind an invisible bench. This inner figure also shapes how we relate to power outside ourselves. Notice how some people grow small around confident men, words shrinking like fabric in sudden rain, or how others bristle at friendly authority, hearing a critique where none was meant. The shadow father filters every tone, every gaze, and decides whether you deserve to stand firm or must retreat. In his presence, you might find yourself sabotaging a perfectly good job offer, mumbling half-hearted answers during the interview, as if pleading guilty to a crime you never committed. He reminds you that claiming space is dangerous, that leadership is presumptuous, that safety lies in staying midway up the ladder. Yet the shadow father is not a monster in the traditional sense. He is a wounded sentinel, a guardian twisted by his own limits. He enforces rules that once kept a fragile child safe. Stay small, stay quiet, do not provoke. In childhood, those rules may have preserved belonging. In adulthood, they strangle possibility. The tragedy is that we obey them long after the threat is gone, mistaking their familiarity for truth. Each time we cower before opportunity, the sentinel's grip tightens, until we recognize the voice behind the command. The turning point arrives when you pause within the trembling and ask, whose judgment do I fear right now? If you listen carefully, you may hear an old phrase, an intonation that is not the executive's voice at all. Perhaps it is the subtle hiss of, "Don't embarrass me," or the weary sigh of, "Why can't you get it right?" In that moment, the phantom steps into the light and you see him as he is, not an omnipotent judge, but an echo, powerful only as long as it remains unnamed. The realization does not dissolve the fear overnight, but it loosens the chain. For if the voice is an echo, you can choose whether to let it reverberate. Understanding the shadow father's grip is the first act of reclaiming authority over your own life. The path is not to silence him through force, nor to banish him in anger. Instead, you meet him with the courage of a grown soul. I see you. I know where you came from, and I will not let your wound dictate my worth. From that recognition springs an unexpected compassion, for the father who could not offer more, and for the child who did the best he could with incomplete maps. Compassion breaks the spell of fear, because judgment cannot thrive where understanding resides. And so we arrive at a new threshold. To truly navigate beyond self-doubt, you must listen to the voice that still presides in quiet judgment and invite it into dialogue. The next step of our journey will show how that conversation begins and how the once tyrannical figure can be disarmed, transformed, and ultimately integrated into the wise guidance you have sought all along. The most disconcerting authorities are not the ones who thunder. They are the ones who speak so softly that you begin mistaking their words for your own thoughts. Somewhere between childhood and middle age, many of us inherit a hushed decree that governs everything we attempt. It slips into our internal dialogue while we are brushing our teeth, signing a contract, or preparing to raise a toast in our own honor. The words vary, yet the cadence is always the same. Keep your head down, do not draw too much light, remember your failures, play it small. At first, you assume such counsel is reasonable modesty, the caution of an adult who has seen enough crashes to steer clear of speed. But with time, you notice the voice is not merely prudent. It is exacting, relentless, and, most tellingly, it never grants you full permission to exist. Jung understood that this inner judge is the lingering vibration of a father's unfinished sentence. Perhaps your father rarely spoke praise, or maybe he praised you only with a side remark about how much further you still had to go. Either way, the young psyche, desperate to preserve attachment, internalized the ambivalence as law. Now, decades later, you stand at the podium accepting an award and feel a prickle of guilt as if the plaque was stolen property. The applause is warm, yet your stomach tightens, bracing for some invisible bailiff to drag you away for impersonating competence. You smile, mutter something self-deprecating, and everyone laughs, not realizing you just paid an old tax to an old ghost. Consider Maria, a 50-year-old nurse who saved countless lives during a long night shift at the height of a medical crisis. Afterward, her colleagues planned a celebration, yet Maria lingered at the edge of the break room, unable to step fully into the circle. When asked why, she shrugged and murmured that others had worked just as hard. Later in therapy, she recalled a childhood memory, finishing first in a school race and running into her father's arms, only to hear, "Next time do it with better form." In adulthood, she ran every metaphorical race with perfect form, yet if someone complimented her stride, the inner judge reminded her that sincere joy might provoke ridicule or abandonment. Maria's modesty appeared gracious, but inside, it was a chain. She felt fraudulent precisely because authentic pride had been forbidden territory for so long that she no longer recognized it as her rightful home. That judge is cunning. It wears many masks. It can masquerade as ethical caution, spiritual humility, or even intellectual rigor, yet its deeper agenda is to preserve familiarity. The psyche, like a child clutching a worn blanket, often chooses the safety of old discomfort over the risk of new freedom. The inner judge keeps you orbiting predictable doubts, so you never venture into the bewildering terrain of unconditional self-trust. It is not that the voice is true, it is simply known, and what is known feels safer than the unknown radiance of your full power. Power, after all, would require you to stand alone, to own your choices, to become visible in ways that make rejection possible. Safer, then, to cut your own knees before life ever has the chance. But something shifts the first time you notice the exact wording of the judge's decree. You hear yourself think, "Do not get too proud," and realize the phrase sounds curiously dated, like a sentence uttered in your grandfather's kitchen. Or you pause after the whisper, "You are not ready," and feel an unexpected wave of grief rather than shame, because you realize readiness has been a continually moving target, one you were never meant to reach. In that moment of recognition, the judge is forced to step out of the shadows. He stands there, robe frayed, gavel trembling, and you see not a towering authority, but a once necessary defense whose time has passed. Compassion and rebellion rise together, compassion for the child who needed this protector, rebellion against allowing that child's fear to command an adult's destiny. The turning begins here, when you permit yourself a small, radical act to let victory be sweet without apology, to let competency feel solid under your feet, to raise a glass in your own honor and sip it slowly without scanning the room for disapproval. As soon as you do, the judge fidgets. His power lies in the fact that you never question the jurisdiction. Question it once, and you discover that the courtroom exists only in your neural pathways, not in the outside world. And like an outdated law, still printed in dusty books, it can be revised. The inner dialogue starts to change. Perhaps, maybe, I am allowed. Perhaps I do not need someone older, taller, sterner to declare the verdict of my worth. Perhaps I can grant it to myself. This revelation does not eradicate the judge overnight, but it does something better. It transforms him. Jung believed that once a psychic figure is made conscious, it must evolve or dissolve. With each act of self-permission, the judge's gavel grows lighter, his robe loosens, his expression softens into something that looks almost like pride. The same voice that once hissed, "Play it safe," begins to murmur, "Try it and see." Your nervous system learns the difference between humility and self-erasure, between caution and paralysis. You discover that authentic pride does not swell into arrogance. It settles in the chest like a quiet sunrise, illuminating without burning. And this realization becomes the hinge on which the next door swings open. For you now sense that the whisper was never simply background noise. It was a vow made long ago to stay small for the sake of belonging. To outgrow that vow is to risk standing in full height, and to risk finally being seen. The path forward will ask for more courage, but also promises more life. You're not just listening to that voice, you've been living by it, like a vow you never knew you made. Somewhere in the silence between childhood memory and adult behavior, an agreement was made. Not in ink, but in pain. Not with your father, but with the part of you that was shaped by what he withheld. It was not conscious, not deliberate. But, like all powerful contracts, it was binding. It sounded something like this: if I become everything he wanted, maybe I'll finally be safe. Or perhaps, if I become nothing like him, I'll never be hurt like that again. Either way, the terms were rooted not in truth, but in survival. Jung taught that, when we are wounded by those meant to guide us, we unconsciously stay loyal to the wound, not because we want to suffer, but because suffering becomes the compass we use to orient our lives. And until we become aware of that agreement, we live inside its cage while calling it our path. This hidden contract shows up in more ways than we realize. Sometimes it looks like relentless ambition, the kind that never lets you rest because rest feels like weakness. You chase title after title, relationship after relationship, not for joy but for redemption, hoping that one more success will silence the voice that once told you you're never enough. Other times, it looks like rejection of every traditional role, a fierce refusal to follow structure or routine, because structure reminds you of control, and control reminds you of him. You might even pride yourself on your independence, never noticing that every move is still a reaction to his shadow. Either way, your life is not being authored by you, it's being ghost-written by a wound you forgot you made sacred. Take Michael, a 47-year-old executive whose entire identity was built around proving he was not his father. His father, a rigid military man, barked commands but never offered praise. Michael grew up vowing he'd never be that cold, never put people in boxes. So he built a creative career, a flexible life, even a parenting style that gave his kids all the affection he craved. Yet inside, he often felt hollow. At work, he sabotaged authority figures, resenting any structure imposed upon him. At home, he sometimes overcompensated, terrified of becoming a disciplinarian, and in the quiet, he realized that though his life looked different from his father's, it was still entirely shaped by him. He wasn't free. He was just dancing in a different corner of the same room. What Jung would suggest is that rebellion, like compliance, is still captivity when it is compulsive. Both are reactions, neither is sovereignty. And when we live in reaction, whether through appeasement or opposition, we are still orbiting the old center. We are still obeying the contract. Breaking that agreement is not about hating or forgiving your father. It is about realizing that the pain you built your life around is no longer the authority it once was. You start to see that you do not owe the past your allegiance. You owe your soul its liberation. The hardest part of breaking the contract is not the external shift, but the internal disorientation. For many, the wound became an identity. Who am I if I am no longer proving him wrong? What do I become if I am not striving for his ghost's applause? This moment is what Jung called the encounter with the self, the deeper identity that exists beneath roles, beneath narratives, beneath the wound. And that self is not interested in proving or rejecting. It is only interested in integrating. It does not want you to erase your father or replace him. It wants you to reclaim the inner authority that was projected outward for too long. To recognize the contract is to begin hearing the soul's distress signals, those subtle aches that whisper, "This isn't mine," the fatigue that follows victories that don't feel like yours, the unease after conversations where you smiled too long, agreed too quickly, the quiet grief after milestones that look like success but feel like betrayal of your truth. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of awakening. They are the soul's way of telling you that the old script, no matter how familiar, is no longer worthy of your voice. And that voice, long silenced or distorted, begins to stir the moment you ask, what if I stop performing for someone who is no longer watching? What if I stop rebelling against someone who is no longer here? What if I could write a life that is not a reaction, but a revelation? In that question lies the quiet birth of freedom. The contract, once seen, begins to lose its power. The chains fall, not with noise, but with the soft rustle of permission. You are not here to be better than him. You are here to be fully yourself. And that begins the moment you stop negotiating with ghosts. Long before the mind can name it, the soul registers an injury in quiet, rhythmic pulses. It does not howl or demand immediate attention. It taps gently, like rain on a roof at night, returning with such persistence that eventually even the most distracted heart must pause to listen. Perhaps you have felt it as a sudden rush of dread while opening an email, convinced some hidden mistake will be exposed, or as the flat ache that follows a standing ovation when the applause fades and leaves only a hollow ringing in your chest. These sensations are not random quirks of temperament. They are the coded signals of an inner father wound, still oozing beneath layers of achievement and polite conversation. One signal arrives as an almost paralyzing fear of failure, so strong that you rehearse every task until even success feels exhausting. Another appears as relentless overachievement. You sprint from goal to goal, yet each finish line merely reveals a longer track ahead. A third shows itself in the muted register of your feelings, as if someone dimmed the colors of your emotional world until celebration and sorrow look nearly the same. A fourth emerges in your uneasy relationship with male authority. You shrink or bristle, unsure whether to bow or bare your teeth. Finally, there is the quiet refrain of unworthiness, the sense that no matter how brightly you shine, some crucial credential is missing. Consider Elena, a respected physician in her early 50s. Patients adored her bedside manner, colleagues relied on her precision, and her research papers drew accolades from prestigious journals. Yet every night she drove home in tense silence, shoulder muscles clenched around an invisible burden. She told no one that each morning, before unlocking her office, she spent 10 minutes in her car rehearsing apologies for mistakes she had not made, convinced that today would expose her as inadequate. Her father, a renowned surgeon, had once dismissed her childhood curiosity with a stern decree: mastery or mediocrity, nothing in between. Decades later, his voice had evolved into her own internal directive. Fear of failure forced her to triple-check charts at midnight. Compulsive overachievement meant publishing study after study, never letting herself rest. Even when a junior resident praised her mentoring, Elena felt numb, unable to absorb the warmth. She distrusted male department heads without knowing why, expecting every evaluation to become a reprimand, and beneath it all, she carried the certainty that excellence was merely a disguise for deficiency. These patterns, Jung would say, are less symptoms of personal flaw than evidence of an unhealed archetypal breach. The soul learnt long ago that worth was conditional, that safety depended on perfection, that love arrived only through relentless proof. Each achievement became a bandage, briefly staunching a deeper bleed. And because the wound lies beyond logic, no amount of reasoning, no inspirational quotes, no performance reviews can convince the nervous system it is finally safe. The soul keeps signaling until the conscious self agrees to descend and address the original rupture. If you tune in, you may recognize similar signals in your own life. You win a contract, yet feel oddly fraudulent signing it. A partner professes unwavering affection, and you smile, but inside you tighten, half expecting their devotion to vanish. You volunteer for extra duties, telling yourself you love the challenge, when in truth you fear the stillness that would expose how little you value yourself without output. These are not moral failings, they are sacred breadcrumbs leading back to the site of the fracture. Each breadcrumb asks, will you stop running long enough to kneel beside the child who made this bargain for survival? And therein lies the pivotal turn. Such wounds cannot be mended by intellect alone. You cannot draft a business plan for self-worth or analyze your way out of emotional numbness. The bleeding stops only when you enter the realm of symbol and ritual, the older language of the psyche. To heal, you must step beyond explanation and into conversation with the unseen. Letters never mailed, candles lit for forgotten grief, guided dialogues where the child meets a wiser inner father. These acts are not performance, they are initiation. They teach the nervous system a new story, encode safety inside the body, and allow the soul to whisper something softer than caution. Welcome home. So when the next signal arrives, when your heart pounds at the thought of being noticed, or when success feels strangely cold, listen, not to obey the fear, but to hear what it tries to protect. For beneath every tremor is a map, guiding you back toward the place where the wound first formed, and forward toward the place where it can finally be blessed. And that blessing begins with ritual, with the courageous decision to turn inward, to light a candle in the darkness and say to the wounded child, I am here now. I will not leave again. You cannot rewrite the past, but the psyche longs not for revision. It longs for recognition, for renewal. Healing the father wound is not about erasing history. It is about tending to what the child inside you never received. And so begins the sacred practice of refathering, not as an intellectual concept, but as a living ritual. The inner child does not heal through insight alone. It heals when the adult self shows up in ways no one else ever did. This is not the father you had, nor the one you wished for, but the one you now choose to become, for your own soul. The journey begins in small symbolic acts that speak the language of the unconscious. Words left unsaid finally find paper. Candles are lit not as decoration, but as light offered to the dark corners of memory. You sit in silence, not to escape the noise, but to make room for a new voice to emerge. One that says, I see you. You matter. You are safe now. These rituals may appear subtle to the world, but they are tectonic shifts in the inner landscape. Every time you write that unsent letter or close your eyes and imagine the hand you needed but never felt, you rewire something ancient inside you. You offer your soul the nourishment it never learned to ask for. Consider James, a 55-year-old executive who had spent decades striving for a father's respect he would never receive. Promotions came and went, his title grew longer, but his sense of fulfillment remained eerily silent. His father, a strict military man, had once told him, men don't quit, they endure. And so James endured, long hours, loveless meetings, the weight of a job that drained him, until one night, unable to sleep, he sat on his porch and felt something break. Not a collapse, but a quiet surrender. He began a daily ritual, 30 minutes each morning with a journal and a candle. He wrote to his father, not to accuse, but to release. He imagined a new figure seated across from him, not the man who withheld affection, but an inner father who simply listened. Over time, James noticed something shift. The voice that once said, stay quiet, began to whisper, speak. The fear that once said, endure, gave way to a calm certainty. You can choose something better. On the 30th day, James resigned from a position he had outgrown a decade earlier. He didn't storm out in rebellion. He walked out in reverence for himself. That morning, before he sent the email, he lit a candle and said aloud, "I release the contract of silence. I choose peace over performance." His hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of reclaiming his own authority. This is the essence of refathering, choosing to show up for the parts of you that were once left alone. It is not grand or glamorous. It is daily, humble, and deeply symbolic. You speak to yourself with kindness in the mirror, not to boost confidence, but to train the inner father to affirm rather than criticize. You set boundaries not to punish others, but to protect the sacred ground you've spent years learning to inhabit. You rest, not because you're lazy, but because your worth is no longer measured by exhaustion. These are not just habits, they are rituals of resurrection. They are how the tyrant transforms into the guide. And as these rituals deepen, something astonishing happens. The father within, once a looming figure of absence, anger, or cold disapproval, begins to shift form. He becomes less like a judge and more like a mentor. You hear him not as a warning, but as wisdom. He no longer looms over your decisions with silent disapproval. He walks beside you with quiet steadiness, reminding you that your value was never in question. The old voice may still echo, but it no longer directs your path. Because now, a new voice has emerged. One shaped not by fear, but by presence. This is how refathering unfolds, not in sudden healing, but in faithful practice. You rise each day and choose again to honor what once was dishonored. You hold space for pain without letting it define you. You bless the path beneath your feet, even if your own father never taught you how to walk it. In doing so, you break the lineage of silence and begin a legacy of inner stability. You become what you once needed, and in that becoming, the soul exhales, knowing it is finally held. There comes a dawn, often quiet and almost imperceptible, when you realize the stern voice that once dictated your every move has softened into guidance rather than command. At first, it feels like stepping into a room just after someone has switched off a buzzing fluorescent light. The sudden hush is startling, almost suspicious. You pause, waiting for the old criticisms to scuttle back, but they do not. In their place, you sense a steady presence, neither indulgent nor severe, simply attentive. It watches as you make breakfast, answer emails, and choose rest over one more late-night slog, and it does not scold. It only offers a clear nod, as if to say, you know what you are doing. That presence is the wise guardian, the inner father transformed. He has learned that love does not mean relentless correction, that strength is not measured by volume, and that permission granted from within is stronger than applause collected outside. This shift is not abstract. It translates into choices that once felt terrifying. Grace, a woman of 60 who spent decades climbing academic ladders, woke one morning with a conviction she could no longer ignore. Instead of drafting another research proposal aimed at impressing distant committees, she sent out an email inviting a handful of friends to gather in her living room for an evening of shared stories and meditation. 5 people attended the first circle. She was nervous, but not paralyzed. The wise guardian stood behind her, whispering encouragement when her voice shook. Weeks became months, circles grew from 5 to 20, and Grace found herself guiding strangers through grief and renewal. She did not seek permission, she embodied it. The old father within, who once demanded citations and accolades, had been re-educated. Now he offered structure when she planned an event, gentle challenge when she doubted, and silent pride when participants wept in healing. In allowing the guardian to rise, Grace reclaimed her vocation not as a resume line, but as a living gift. A similar dawn broke for Miguel, a 53-year-old carpenter who had traded his workshop for a corporate desk after hearing that artistry could not feed a family. For years, he wore suits that never felt like his skin and punched numbers into spreadsheets with hands that longed for wood grain. During the rituals of refathering, he began to spend Sunday afternoons in his garage, sanding small blocks of cedar without any goal except the pleasure of the scent. One afternoon, he felt a quiet surge of certainty. Build something larger. The wise guardian did not shout instructions. He rested a calm hand on Miguel's shoulder, suggesting that passion was permission enough. Miguel quit his desk job 6 months later and reopened his woodworking studio. Orders came slowly at first, yet each piece he crafted seemed to breathe, infused with the steadiness he had cultivated inside. He no longer built to prove a point to a silent critic. He built because the rhythm of saw and chisel aligned with the deeper cadence of his life. Clients noticed. They spoke of a warmth in his furniture, an almost intangible sense of welcome. That warmth was the guardian made visible. The hallmark of this new inner presence is balance. He knows when to challenge you, a clear, firm reminder to keep promises to yourself, and when to stand simply as a witness while you experiment, wander, even fail. His authority does not come from fear, but from groundedness. Where the shadow father demanded perfection, the wise guardian asks for honesty. Where the inner judge whispers about unworthiness, the guardian offers perspective. Mistakes are lessons, victories are milestones. Neither defines the soul. In moments of confusion, he does not impose answers. He invites you to listen beneath the noise of doubt. His compass points to integrity rather than external validation. You sense him when you decline an invitation out of genuine exhaustion and feel no guilt, or when you raise your prices to honor your craft and experience not panic but quiet certainty. This evolution does more than steady your own steps. It becomes a lighthouse for others still tossed by inner storms. Grace's circles welcome people who have never spoken their pain aloud. Miguel's handmade tables hold conversations among families that had not sat together in years. Students, colleagues, and grandchildren notice a difference they cannot name. They stand a little taller in your presence, as if your inner stability grants them permission to explore their own. The wise guardian within you radiates outward, transforming the room without grand gestures. It is the calm at the center of your eyes, the patience in your listening, the confidence in your yes, and the clarity in your no. Reaching this point does not mean the old echoes never return. They occasionally drift in on tired days or during fresh challenges. Yet now they meet a gatekeeper who nods politely and says, "I have heard your concerns, and I am choosing differently." Each time you do this, the guardian's roots deepen, and the child you once were, confused, striving, afraid, rests a little easier. The contract with pain has been replaced by a covenant with authenticity. And once you have become your own guardian, the light inside you refuses containment. It spills into conversations, decisions, and silent moments with loved ones, offering safety where there was once tension. The healed father within does not hoard wisdom. He passes it along effortlessly, like sunlight through a clear window. In our next reflection, we will watch how that light moves beyond personal freedom to reshape the legacy you leave in every heart you touch. Healing, you come to realize, is never a solitary candle, but a torch passed from hand to hand, lighting corridors you may never walk yourself. When the wise guardian stands within you, each breath becomes a quiet blessing on the space around you. A conversation at the kitchen table softens because your voice carries steadiness instead of tension. A child testing boundaries feels guidance rather than threat and begins trusting the world in ways you once could not. Friends seek your counsel, not for answers, but for the calm that radiates from a heart no longer defended. You do nothing dramatic. You simply occupy your own depth, and in doing so confirm for others that such depth is safe terrain. This is the secret alchemy of the healed father archetype. Wounds transmute into wisdom, and wisdom becomes shelter. The inner critic that once demanded perfection now reminds you to love what is unfinished, and that acceptance frees others to do the same. The fear that once urged silence transforms into discernment, and your measured words teach those nearby that truth can be spoken without violence. What began as a private reckoning with memory grows into a living legacy. You find yourself pausing before judgment, choosing curiosity instead, And notice how shoulders relax across the room. You place a hand on your own chest during moments of doubt, and suddenly a colleague watches, mirrors the gesture, and inhales a breath they did not know they were holding. These ripples are the quiet miracles of inner work made visible. Remember this when old echoes tempt you back into the narrow corridors of unworthiness. Each choice for compassion over complaint, for presence over performance, rewrites more than your story. It rewrites the emotional climate inherited by every person who crosses your path. The safest homes are not built of walls, but of nervous systems that no longer flinch. Your steadiness can become that home. Let it be the ground where children grow bold, partners rest easy, and strangers gather courage. One day, long after your voice has faded from daily conversation, someone will repeat a gentle phrase you once offered in passing, and another heart will feel seen. In that moment, the work you began today will still be alive, moving quietly through the world like light traveling farther than its source. Choose love over fear again and again, and the Father within you will hand forward not pain, but peace. A peace resilient enough to outlast your own footsteps. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.